Hello everyone, this is Story Hunter. Today I will tell you about the wizard, the head of the Istari Order and the White Council, Saruman. I will tell you about his life, what he did, and what ultimately happened to him. Saruman was originally a powerful Maya of Aule the Smith, named Kurumo, later in Sindarin Kurunir. From the beginning, he was much like Sauron, being ambitious and cunning, and desiring order. As Tarandor, Saruman was among the 5 guardians who were sent to reinforce Melian and the already active guardians in protecting the newly awakened elves from Melkor's emissaries. In Valinor, the land of the Valar, a council was called by Manwë, Eru's regent, shortly after Sauron's defeat by the last alliance of elves and men. Though the Dark Lord was overthrown, he had not been effectively vanquished, and his shadow began to fall upon Middle-earth a second time. It was decided to send 5 emissaries to Middle-earth. These should be mighty peers of Sauron, yet forego might and clothe themselves in flesh, as they were intended to help men and elves unite against Sauron. The wizards were forbidden, however, from matching the Dark Lord in power and fear, or trying to dominate the free peoples. Kurumo was one of those who volunteered, whereas the last one, Olorin, later known as Gandalf, was commanded by Manwë to go too. It was from this point that Kurumo began to be jealous of Olorin, due to Varda's decision to send Olorin not as the 3rd Istar, but as the 2nd. He also was charged to take Eowendil, later called Radagast, to please Yavanna, which Kurumo did not wish to do, and this led to contempt for the latter wizard. The others who were chosen were Alatar and Palando, the Blue Wizards. Kurumo then was appointed overall leader of the group. The 5 wizards arrived separately at the Grey Havens in the west of Eriador around the year TA 1000. Kurumo appeared first, but apparently neglected to take Eowendil with him. Eowendil came later alongside Olorin. Only the keeper of the havens, Círdan the shipwright, knew Kurumo's nature and purpose. Kurumo would later discover that Círdan had given Narya, the Red Ring, to Olorin upon their first landing in Middle-earth. Even though Kurumo was recognized as the head of the order while Olorin was not, Círdan had divined Olorin as the wisest and greatest of the Istari. Kurumo's jealousy of Olorin grew from these events, perhaps because he feared that he would eventually supplant him as chief of the wizards. To the elves, Kurumo became known as Kurunir, whereas men called him Saruman, the name by which he was afterwards remembered. The White Messenger and the 2 Blue Wizards went into the east of Middle-earth. After 1.5 millennia, Saruman returned to the west, just as Sauron's power was growing again at Dol Guldur in Mirkwood. When the White Council was formed around the year 2463 of the Third Age, in order to counter Sauron, Saruman was appointed its leader, though Galadriel wanted Gandalf in this position. Saruman refused to step down due to his pride, while Gandalf had declined. The White Messenger, though, continued to resent the Grey Pilgrim. He also had an intense dislike for Radagast, whom he dismissed as a fool. At this point, Saruman had begun to sense the resurgence of Sauron. This was also the same year that Sauron's One Ring was taken by the Stor Sméagol, later called Gollum, who disappeared with it into the Misty Mountains for hundreds of years. The White Wizard's extensive research, especially into ring lore, had led him to admire the Dark Lord, and he fell into the folly of imitating him. Saruman believed he could be the ruler of Middle-earth, in Sauron's likeness, and have his own will by force. It was during the meetings of the White Council that Saruman first noted Gandalf's interest in hobbits and the Shire, and believing that all his deeds related to some as yet undisclosed plan of his for self-enhancement, the White Wizard himself began keeping a closer watch on the Grey Pilgrim and sent spies to the Shire to report on all his movements. At first, he himself visited it secretly, but stopped when he realized that its inhabitants had noticed him. Amongst the purposes of his visits was to procure some of the halflings' pipeweed, since in secret imitation of Gandalf, and for which he publicly belittled him, Saruman had begun to smoke. In the year TA 2759, Saruman came to the crowning of Friolaf Hildason in Rohan, wooing him with gifts and flattery. With the permission of both the Steward of Gondor, Beren, and the King of Rohan, Frealaf, Saruman settled in Orthanc at Isengard as both Warden of the Tower and representative of Minas Tirith. Though a nominal ally to both the Rohirrim and Gondorians, the White Wizard's main goal all along had been to eventually claim the stronghold as his own seat of power. As he had hoped, Saruman also found one of the remaining Palantiri in Orthanc and concealed his use of it from the rest of the White Council. In TA 2850, Gandalf entered Dol Guldur and confirmed that the evil presence was indeed Sauron. On Saruman's advice, the White Council decided against attacking Dol Guldur. The Grey Pilgrim would later remark that it was at this meeting that he first began to suspect that the White Wizard desired to attain the One Ring. Saruman's real intention was to allow Sauron to build up his strength so that the ring would reveal itself and he could claim it first. Concealing his contempt, Saruman persuaded Radagast to teach him how to tame birds and beasts. These he used as spies for his own purposes, unbeknownst to the Brown Wizard. He later found that the enemy had more knowledge of the possible location of the One Ring than he expected. Therefore, in TA 2941, Saruman finally agreed to an assault upon Dol Guldur. The attack was successful, and by the devices of the White Wizard, the Dark Lord was driven from the fortress. At the last meeting of the White Council in TA 2953, Saruman claimed that the ring had been passed down Anduin to the sea. He then ceased all cooperation with the Wise, taking Isengard for his own and fortifying it. Surrounding himself with all who hated Gondor and Rohan, that is, northern orcs from the Misty Mountains, Dunlendings, and other evil things, Saruman troubled the borders of the Rohirrim during the reign of Thengel and began building his own army. Around TA 2990, Saruman started the special breeding orcs at Isengard, and as Morgoth and Sauron had done before him, crossbred orcs with men to make half-orcs, and eventually his own Uruk-hai, both of whom could endure the sunlight. Soon enough, Sauron, who had returned to Mordor, used the Palantir captured from Minas Ithil, which had since become known as Minas Morgul, to establish contact with Saruman's Orthanc stone. Daunted with threats and lured with promises of power, the White Wizard was ensnared and became one of the Dark Lord's greatest agents, desiring or no longer opposing his victory. Though the Wise were suspicious of Saruman's designs regarding the ring, they were not aware he was now an ally or servant of Sauron. Far from a faithful subordinate, however, the White Wizard plotted to usurp his new master's place as Lord of the Rings and Middle-earth. If the gamble for the ring failed, Saruman's fawning and usefulness would see him rise at Sauron's side, in time becoming the true power behind his throne. The White Wizard failed to understand that he was little more than the Dark Lord's puppet, and would have ultimately been cast aside. Sauron knew, or guessed, Saruman's thoughts, even without the aid of Palantiri or of spies. Motivated by both his master's instructions and thoughts of his own dominion, the White Wizard made the final preparations for the conquest of Rohan. Aided by his orcs, Saruman slowly turned Nan-Curunir into a child's model or a slave's flattery of Mordor. Trees were cut down and replaced by caverns filled with forges, furnaces, and other machines. Around TA 3000, the shadow of Mordor reached out to Rohan, and Saruman sent many of his Uruk-hai to join the northern orcs and the Mordor orcs in raiding the eastern villages. To further weaken the kingdom, Saruman bought Grima Wormtongue, Theoden's royal counselor, with the promise of Eowyn's hand by TA 3014, and used him as a mole in the court of Edoras to sap the king's strength with deceitful advice and poisons. Suspecting a potential connection between the ring and the Shire, based mostly on Gandalf's interest there, Saruman instructed his agents to infiltrate the Shire and keep tabs on the comings and goings of any important hobbits. His dealings with Pipeweed had also earned him allies among the Sackville-Baggins and Bracegirdle families, who owned many plantations. Further trying to emulate his master, the White Wizard crafted his own lesser ring and similarly styled himself as Ringmaker. Using the kind-hearted Radagast as an unwitting pawn, Saruman summoned Gandalf to Isengard. So it was that upon Gandalf's arrival, Saruman revealed his betrayal and true intentions, shedding the title of Saruman the White in favor of Saruman of Many Colors. Saruman announced his desire to rule Middle-earth as Sauron's right hand, or to supplant him using the ring. He then demanded that the Grey Pilgrim submit to him or to his master. Gandalf refused both choices, for which Saruman imprisoned him atop Orthanc. This way, Saruman thought he would force Gandalf into revealing the ring's whereabouts. 9. Before sending him as a prisoner to Sauron in Mordor. The White Wizard had even revealed to Sauron he had got as his prisoner the Grey Pilgrim. 10. But Gandalf later escaped with help from Gwaihir the Windlord, one of the Great Eagles, and made Saruman's treachery known to the rest of the Free Peoples at the Council of Elrond. By one account, the Nazgûl came 2 days after Gandalf's escape, and Saruman used his voice to persuade the Morgul Lord that he did not know the ring's location, but that Gandalf did, and that they should seek him nearby. Hearing this, the Nazgûl went back on the main road and instead found Grima on his way to tell Saruman that Gandalf had been to Edoras. Fearing for his life, Wormtongue revealed that the corrupted wizard had withheld information and told the Ringwraiths how to reach the Shire. By another account, Saruman still had Gandalf as a prisoner when the Nazgûl arrived. The White Wizard assured the Ringwraiths that he would obtain the Shire's whereabouts from the Grey Pilgrim or hand him over to them. Daunted by the full horror of service to Mordor, Saruman had actually been about to beg Gandalf for forgiveness and help, only to find him gone. Nonetheless, he pretended that the Grey Pilgrim was still there and had just given up the location of the Shire. Saruman believed he now had enough time to try seize the ring, while still feigning allegiance to Sauron. But the Ringwraiths soon learned that the White Wizard knew far more than he had shared with them. On their way to the Shire, the Nazgûl met one of Saruman's agents in Eriador, from whom they got detailed maps of the Shire. They sent the spy back to the Shire, after warning him that he was now in the service of Mordor, not Isengard. The spy in question was the ill-favored Dunlending at the Prancing Pony. Commanded by Sauron, Saruman moved against Theoden to keep Rohan from riding to Gondor's aid. With Grima preventing any military mobilization within the kingdom, Saruman sent large raiding forces to wreak havoc in the westfold of Rohan. The only true obstacles to his invasion were Theoden's son and nephew, Theodred and Eomer respectively. As Wormtongue had failed to turn the two men against each other, the White Wizard tasked his servants to slay the king's heir at all costs. Per this special order, the warriors of Isengard engaged the defenders of Rohan at the fords of Isen. The first battle at the fords of Isen ended in the death of Theodred, followed by the retreat of Saruman's hordes. At the same time, the corrupted wizard also tried to betray his master. He sent trusted warbands to hunt down the Fellowship and capture the ring-bearer. Saruman's scouts, led by Ugluk, ambushed the company at Amon Hen, where they took Pippin and Merry captive, while also shooting Boromir with many black-feathered arrows when he tried to defend the hobbits. Slowed on their way back to Isengard by conflict with Mordor orcs sent by a suspicious Sauron, the Isengarders were slain on the eaves of Fangorn by Rohirrim, led by Eomer. Gimli believed he had glimpsed Saruman at the site of the skirmish, presumably having hastened to claim the ring from the hobbits. The White Wizard's position was becoming dangerously isolated. His neighbors he had made his enemies, and he had also cheated his new master. Believing he might yet claim lordship over Rohan and regain Sauron's favor by delivering the Rohirrim to him, Saruman intensified his efforts against Theoden. Although Grima Wormtongue had been ousted as an agent of the enemy, Rohan had been weakened, allowing Saruman to marshal his full might and unleash his Uruk-hai hordes upon the Rohirrim people at Helm's Deep. Though it initially held the upper hand, Saruman's army was vanquished in the Battle of the Hornburg, its ranks broken by Gandalf's reinforcements. Meanwhile, the wizard also found his own stronghold under assault. The Ents led by Treebeard besieged Isengard, seeking vengeance for incursions by orc axemen into Fangorn. These two confrontations led to the end of Saruman's reign of terror in the west, while also costing Sauron a valuable, albeit duplicitous, vassal.